Paging Dr. Douchebag. Dr. Douchebag.
Hello, my fellow carbon-based multicellular organisms. Welcome to Horror Convos. You're right on time. Step into our office, have a seat. You can fill out this form here. We'll review your insurance. You can drop your pants for me, and we will get you on your way before you have time to process the sudden sexual confusion. And then you can go on ahead to your doctor's appointment.
Yo!
Apart from running a private clinic in our spare time,
welcome to the Dallas Buyers Club.
Horror Convos is a casual, relaxing, and occasionally funny podcast where we choose one topic per episode and discuss horror media related to it, as well as my own personal history, thoughts, and opinions with that topic. We then segue into examples of media that portray the subject well versus a couple that sell it not so well. I often have guests join in the conversation, and we hold regular polls for you to decide what topic is covered on our Patreon exclusive For the Fans episodes. If you're not a fan of ads, not to worry. It's not like they pay your bills, right? You can listen to the full podcast ad-free on Patreon, too. Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and break that notification bell's ribcage so you never miss when our newest stuff is uploaded. Today's topic is something virtually every at least semi-developed civilization on Earth can relate to: horror of hospitals.
Relax, I'm a doctor. Ha 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 ha.
I know, your anxiety's already flaring. Many of you were probably thinking,
You said this podcast was relaxing.
Not to worry, your tightening sphincter is an understandable response, but rest assured that we'll still have some fun here. So now that I've probably already lost most of you, since we still live in a society that's too repressed and socially indoctrinated to not feel shame or cringe at the mere mention of prostate exams in a humorous light, those of you still here can settle in. Enjoy that gentle breeze in the back of your gown, and let's begin. So this is arguably one of the oldest subgenres of horror, going back throughout the majority of human history. I mean, as long as there have been facilities dedicated to the practice of medicine and or hospice for people in need, there have likely been horror stories of some form related to those facilities. I would propose that this particular subgenre was kind of a spin-off from the larger topic of horror related to science as a whole. Well, particularly medical science. Just the fear of what happens when science goes too far has always resonated with a lot of people. The oldest iconic example probably being Frankenstein. But hospitals took that fear and made it more personal, more focused on the human condition, and isolated to a specific aesthetic associated with that dynamic. The aesthetic being this generally clinical, cold, sanitized, unnatural, artificial, experimental, body horror, dehumanizing kind of melancholy. It's no secret that hospitals have not usually been known or categorized historically as a desirable place to be. Unless it's for drugs, of course. You just gotta know how to play the system. It's an environment that easily, almost effortlessly lends itself to inciting fear and anxiety, which makes it one of the most popular go-to settings for horror stories, alongside the classic choices of a cemetery, haunted building, old castle, dungeon, cave or cavern, campground at nighttime, cabin in the woods, etc. You know, all the archetypal locations sharing the common effect of making your average Joe or Jane instinctively not want to be there.
Fuck this shit, I'm out.
It's just an extremely easy, at this point arguably overused choice of setting to instantly make people uncomfortable. I find from personal experience, as well as my history with horror stories centered on such locations, that not a lot of horror media take full advantage of the potential associated with hospitals. That's a broad statement, I know, but off the top of my head, I seriously can't count more than maybe a little more than 10 movies, series, novels, comics, or video games that really capitalize on it to the maximum amount of fear, that can only be stimulated in a hospital setting. At least stimulated in those specific ways that we associate with it. I could be wrong. It's entirely plausible that I simply need to seek out more media in this subgenre to consume. But I'd like to think that I've already watched or read quite a few stories within this territory. At least a few. I mean, I never claimed to be an expert or top-tier consumer by any means. Like, plenty of people, including other horror podcasters, have seen a lot more of everything than I have. But I have seen an above-average amount of shit myself at this point. And it's been my experience that high-quality hospital horror out of all the media related to this subgenre is a little harder to come by. That is compared to how many quality horror stories you could find that take place in graveyards, haunted houses, the woods, underground, on the water, etc. That's not necessarily a bad problem to have, even if it may turn some people away who've seen so much in that subgenre already that they just lose their liking for it and miss out on the quality stuff as a result. From another point of view, one could argue that it makes the well-executed stuff stick with you that much more. But to be fair, you can say that about a lot of horror categories that stretch back that far. Oversaturation is definitely an issue throughout the entire spectrum of media to varying degrees at this point. Obviously, some subgenres are a lot more fringe than others, but in terms of influence on society and pop culture, historically, hospitals have a tragic irony to them in that they've provided so much material for memorable horror stories precisely because there's such a vast number of real-life horror that came out of them. I say tragic irony because I think the majority of medical professionals would agree that that's the exact opposite of what most hospitals seek to achieve in principle. It's different when you build a Halloween attraction with a fake surgery room designed with blood, gore, and body parts splattered all over the place. And there's a bloody nurse you can't see very well with the strobe light in the dark, but part of you is debating inside, yeah, she's nasty, but kind of sexy. I think I'd still ask her out, even with all that makeup and the baby doll she's swinging around on a bloody umbilical cord. Then you look over at a doctor revving a bone saw like he's Leatherface in a lab coat.
Bone saw is ready!
Obviously that's different. And were there hospitals that looked that horrifying and violated that many health code laws in real life? Hell yes, but on paper, no self-respecting place of medicine historically sets out to scare you. The majority of facilities, for all their gross flaws, at least tried to present themselves as a place where sick and suffering individuals could go to get help, even if for thousands of years that help often involved generally ineffective, often barbaric methods rooted in a fundamental ignorance of how human beings or the world around them worked. The church held authority on this stuff for a long time. Depending on where and when you lived, their go-to was typically trying to pray away most illnesses, and if your children didn't make it, then I guess that was just a sign that God decreed they weren't meant to live past the age of 4. Mysterious ways, all that jazz. They blamed countless ailments and germs on demons and labeled most anyone who contested that narrative heretics. Predominantly, religious societies were historically a little slow to accept new scientific discoveries because they were so terrified of having to look at their beliefs and admit to themselves, maybe not literally every single solitary thing in our scriptures are entirely accurate. The Bible only tells you so much about human anatomy. What are you going to do? And to be clear, I'm not bagging on religion as inherently detrimental to medicine or science, okay? Tons of revolutionary medical and scientific pioneers to this day are devout believers. Proving germ theory does not discount the existence of God, Satan, Buddha, the mothership, whatever you're into. Religious leaders just needed help getting out of their own way sometimes, letting go of their pride and being open to new possibilities for the betterment of humanity, of health. People spent centuries praying day after day for their God to deliver solutions to countless diseases plaguing them, and wiping out entire villages is, at one time or another. And you know what? God said, you got it. Now you just have to make the decision to use them and maybe not blindly follow your dogma into an early grave. Easy, right? Yeah, you would think so. Oddly enough, we took a little while to get the ball rolling on that. Even in this day and age, still some occasional pushback. Science is always a work in progress. Some people are still set in their ways. Science does go too far sometimes. Baby steps. And of course, all of this doesn't even scratch the surface of the millennia of abuse and basic human rights violations committed in medical institutions or in the name of medical science. I mean, good Lord, it wasn't that long ago in the history of the U.S. alone that we were giving out lobotomies to people who were later proven to have had nothing wrong with them. How many husbands had their wives committed and then lobotomized on account of being labeled with female hysteria? How many kids that we call special needs children today were treated like subhuman animals? I mean, people with disabilities, mental and physical, are one of the longest, if not possibly the longest, oppressed, marginalized minority since the beginning of recorded history. It's not an oppression Olympics, of course, but I mean, that's been a pattern pretty much in every major culture, I think, without exception, that I'm aware of. I talked with my friends David Day and Bryce Hansen on their podcast, Horror Movie Talk.
Go watch it!
Yeah, about my history growing up high-functioning autistic, or neurodivergent, as it's often called now. I am so lucky for many reasons that I was a 90s kid, even when you take into account how little doctors, parents, and the media still had to learn about the spectrum at that time. I was bullied and teased on and off for it growing up. Several kids and adults confused it for mental retardation. In the grand scheme of history, not to make light of my experience by any means, but I am so fortunate that was the worst I had to deal with for growing up autistic. If I had been born even just 50 years earlier, it could and very likely would have been so much worse. I mean, dude, mental health abuse was bad enough at that time in the U.S. Had I been born around, let's say, 1941 in Germany, I would have been on the list of people that Hitler wanted to wipe from existence, and I wouldn't have been able to hide it either. It was obvious once I reached a certain age that I was different. If you met me and heard my voice back then, you'd see what I mean. I was clearly not quote-unquote normal. And I'm not even going to touch the abhorrent experiments the Nazis did on people, including special needs children. All those supernatural and sci-fi horror stories involving Nazi scientists, they make the worst stuff you saw in Call of Duty or Wolfenstein look like kindergarten. So I definitely would not want to get trapped in that time period with the flux capacitor out of juice. And even if we don't use a scenario that extreme, even in as recent as the 1970s through the 80s, mental health was still in the dark ages in some frightening ways when you look into it. Doctors and medical corporations to this day get away with some really immoral shit, particularly in third world countries. He's not a cultural or ethnic judgment, just an observation. I don't care about the skin color of who writes my prescription. But the history of abuse and flat-out criminal behavior in medical science and healthcare are often vastly more horrifying than even the worst shit we saw Nurse Ratched pull. They have, I don't know how many documentaries at this point discussing true crime stories about doctors and nurses that got away with heinous things. And so, streaming services will spoil you for those. So, beyond historical context, are there deeper psychological mechanics to why so many of us fear hospitals? As we know, there are several distinct phobias associated with medicine and doctors as a general industry. Hopefully I'll only mildly butcher their pronunciation. Fear of hospitals, also known as noscomophobia, fear of disease, nausophobia, fear of needles, trypanophobia, fear of blood, hemophobia, not to be confused with homophobia, fear of death, thanatophobia, fear of not knowing when your gown may open in the back, or even just simply a fear or anxiety of not being in control. There's so many elements at play mentally to what makes us fear these places or even the idea of them. It's often very much a combination of nature and nurture. As the popular saying goes, genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. And the current generation we're living in is suffering from the widest, fastest growing mental health crisis in modern history, at least. It's an epidemic of anxiety, depression, body dysmorphia, growing rates of autism, just myriad mental health issues and complications. And medical science being more overtly politicized than ever before. And so it's only natural that this would feed into our instinctive aversion and socially cultivated distrust of medical institutions, especially after the thoroughly disappointing response all around from the general public, the media, the scientific community, and politicians, among others, when the pandemic started. Just a shit show all around that we're still very much feeling the effects of over 3 years after 2020. This is not turning into a partisan rant. Follow someone else and let them tell you what your opinions about everything should be and who you should vote for. That's not my bag. But point being, apart from systemic issues and medical malpractice, the psychology of it is a vital factor in understanding it. When you cut away everything else and analyze it on a neurochemical level, I think it stems from this fundamental dislike we have as a species for anything involving a lack of control. I'm actually going to play some audio from a short video by Tally Sherritt that articulates what I mean in a far more eloquent way than I could. It's only about 4 minutes, and then we'll return to the sound of my buttery smooth voice.
When we want to change people's behavior, we often say, do this, don't do that, right? Basically, we are a lot of times giving orders, whether it is to our kids, people in our family, people that we work with. We are exerting control over others, or at least attempting to exert control over others. But what we find is that what the brain is trying to do, it's trying to control its environment. That's one of the major goals of what the brain is trying to do. And it's trying to do that in order to get rewards and avoid losses. And because of that, in the brain, control has been associated with something good, with a reward, and it's something that people seek out. If people can make a choice, the same part of the brain that is activated when people get a piece of food, like a piece of chocolate, is activated when people have the opportunity to make a choice. When people don't have an opportunity to make a choice, when they feel they don't have control, what is triggered is anxiety. And so what this means is that giving people a choice, giving people a sense that they are in control, that they have agency, is more likely to motivate them, is more likely to put them in the frame of a reward rather than a loss. And because control in and of itself is rewarding, a lot of times people will be willing to give up other kind of rewards, like monetary rewards, in order to have control. For example, in a study that I conducted with my colleagues, we gave people the opportunity to either make choices themselves about random shapes that can give them rewards, or give another person, an expert, an opportunity to make a choice for them. And what we found is that people suboptimally make the decision to keep the agency, to keep the choice themselves, rather than have an expert make the choice for them, even if that expert was more likely to choose the correct thing, to choose a thing that will get them more money. So a way to think about it, it's a bit like the stock market. So a lot of people like to pick their own stocks, right? Instead of giving someone else the opportunity to choose for them experts, or even better, going according to an index, right? And the reason that people like to pick their own stocks is because it gives them a sense of control. It gives them a sense of agency, and that gives them reward. And many times people realize that there might be a monetary loss. Some people are overconfident. They think, well, I'll pick the right thing, and that's fine, but they still are willing to lose parts to have a monetary loss to make the choice themselves. So in fact, in general, people prefer to make their own choices, but there are incidents where people would rather give away the choice. And for example, when the choice is so complicated, the effort is so much effort has to be put in it, that I would rather not do it and give someone else the opportunity to make the choice for me. Or for example, under high amounts of stress, people sometimes realize that it's better to have someone else make the choice for them. Or for example, when making a choice, people are afraid that they will regret what they choose, such as in medical decisions, they sometimes actually prefer to have someone else make the choice for them. And the fears that we have are not necessarily rational. So people, for example, a lot of people are scared of flying, right? So if you look at the numbers, flying is not necessarily the most dangerous thing that you do. Driving your own car is more dangerous. But people are afraid of flying because one of the reasons is that once you're in the plane, you don't have control anymore. You don't have control over the plane. You don't have control of anything really of your environment. So the sense of being in this space where you're losing control completely, giving it to someone else, is something that people feel anxious about. Now, they don't want to take control. I don't want to fly the plane, right? I know I will be dead if I'll fly the plane. But nevertheless, I feel anxious. And I think that's true in other domains like health. One of the reasons that being in a hospital is anxiety-provoking, not only because you're sick, and that's very, anxiety-provoking, but also because, again, you lose control. Everyone's making the decision for you, as they should, the doctors and the nurses. I mean, people should have some say, but they realize that the experts are making the choices for them. And that sense of losing control, again, can cause anxiety. And one thing that studies have shown is that as we age, as we go into older age, we lose some of our control, right? Especially if we go to nursing homes, other people make the choices for us. And that induces stress on the individual as well, because no longer can I choose what will I do and when will I do it.
Okay, I'm back.
Kept you waiting, huh?
Now we'll talk about my personal history regarding hospitals. I am very fortunate in that I don't have much of one. Yeah, in 31 plus years on this planet to date, I actually have not had to go to the hospital for health-related reasons more than a few times. I don't know exactly how many times off the top of my head, but it would most likely be less than the number of fingers on one hand. I've been a generally pretty fairly healthy boy for like 95 to 98% of my life, knock on wood. At the time of recording this, I've only been sick, legitimately sick, about 6 times. I'm not a stranger to the occasional bedridden illness. I'm not a Superman. I missed a couple school days here or there. It's funny, my mom always had this sort of conspiracy theory. She's told me that she took me to get a booster shot, as you do when your baby reaches the appropriate age, and after that appointment specifically, she tells me I literally almost never got sick, even compared to other kids and moms as she talked to. Some kids get sick all the time, especially that young. Some less often, it's a spectrum. But it happened so rarely in my case that my mom almost got paranoid. She became convinced that something in that booster gave me a seemingly permanent, drastic health boost, for lack of a better word. She and I have joked that I must have gotten a super serum of some kind, like the stuff normally reserved for rich people, the billionaire celebrities among the 1% too. Probably get access to the cure for cancer we allegedly already made decades ago. But of course, the hospitals and big pharma and whatever all run this international shadow conspiracy of not sharing it outside specific circles of people because those same people are in bed with the pharmaceutical companies and corporations and the lizard people, and they all make vastly more money by charging for chemo and other less effective treatments. I'm just reading the cliff notes off of Google here. Go ahead and check it out for yourself. Interesting stuff. If get put on the same watch list that I'm on.
Coincidence? I think not!
But, apparently if my mom is right, some booster normally intended for the 1% somehow got mixed up for the shot given to a random toddler in Richmond. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe there's some grand plan for me that I'm not yet aware of. Maybe I'm just one of countless unwilling participants in a covert government experiment. Whatever the reason, point being, I have enjoyed a mostly very healthy life up to now. Hopefully that trend continues. I have suffered the rare bodily injury, the earliest being a broken leg on the church playground when I was 2 or 3. That earned me a tiny cast that I'm sure my family still has saved somewhere. I also did scrape my knee pretty good once when I fell off my bike while riding around with the neighborhood kids I knew living in North Carolina. Very painful, blood pouring down my leg. Thankfully it healed up without a scar. The only other thing I can think of as far as bodily harm is Mom insisting we go to the, at the time, busy hospital after I got into a car accident with my dad at 11, 12 years old. We sat for about 3 to 4 hours, I think, in the waiting room before calling it quits and going home. Mom told me to expect to be sore the next day, which I dreaded the whole night. Didn't get much sleep. I was so anxious, but next morning I felt totally fine, and it didn't feel a thing. Yeah, I'll go into more detail about that story another time, just because I'm saving it for a future episode topic. The most recurring health conditions I've experienced since childhood are irritable bowel syndrome and mild asthma, and neither of which ever put me in the hospital, thankfully, though I have visited the doctor for other things, pretty standard stuff, checkups, vaccines, allergy medication, etc. The most time I've spent consistently in any hospital would be from 2015 to 2020. I volunteered in general services at Bon Secours Memorial Regional for about 5 years. There's a general services, meaning I did a variety of small jobs around the hospital related to patient care and or faculty assistance. Most often I discharged or admitted patients, delivered and transported things where they were needed. I worked one day in the pharmacy when the suction tube delivery system was down. And I briefly worked in the gift shop where the manager and I became good friends, very sweet woman. Every volunteer in general services, we would take turns in rotation through a 4-hour shift and go one at a time or in pairs, depending on how many people were needed. You know, I was the youngest most of the time. A lot of people there were considerably older. I do miss it sometimes. Met some good people there, good friends. But yeah, overall, the worst experience I've ever had in a hospital off the top of my head would be the one time I was sick, lethargic, and dehydrated from a stomach bug. I couldn't keep anything down, not even saltine crackers and water. I was just too nauseous. I absolutely cannot stand nausea.
Loathe entirely.
I'm a grown-ass man, and I'm pretty resilient on the rare occasions I'm sick most of the time. I mean, I'm used to upset stomachs. Again, IBS, that was far more frequent when I was a kid. It's why I stopped eating breakfast for years, even cereal, because I was afraid of upsetting my gut early in the morning and then having to rush to the bathroom hoping I wouldn't be late for school. With nausea, though, I turn into such a baby. I drink Pepto-Bismol like it's juice, take whatever pills would lessen the feeling even a little. That's one reason why I don't drink. I'm a super lightweight with alcohol. Never had more than a couple sips of anything at most. It's just, even mild nausea, I'm just absolutely miserable. Just, not a fan. But anyway, yeah, I had to go to Memorial Regional to get some fluids in me. I was physically weak, sitting with a vomit bag in the waiting room, just pleading for my body to, just give me a break, not make me expel anything else. I got stuck like a pincushion several times between them taking my blood and getting the IV in me. I actually had what's called a blowout.
Big summer blowout.
Evidently, it's what happens when you don't hit the vein properly, so the IV fluids don't flow properly. My arms swelled. I was in much more pain than what's normal for having a needle pumping stuff into your body. So they finally got it right after, I think, 2, maybe 3 tries. I left with medication, felt better, but Mom and I were both frustrated. A nurse I talked to about this years later when I was getting my flu shot explained to me that apparently veins are a lot more difficult to accurately feel and target when you're dehydrated. And hearing that, I thought, oh, well, shit. Now I kind of feel bad for those nurses who saw me that night. At the time, to be blunt, I thought they were just incompetent. Now I learn it was my fault. Yeah, apart from that, my relationship with medicine and doctors has been pretty positive. But I should tell you all this story sometime about when I met a certain medical practitioner by the name of Dr. Katek. Oh, you definitely need to go to Patreon to hear that on the full podcast. Yeah, you ain't getting that for free.
Alright, I get it!
Alrighty, now we'll compare some prime examples of hospital horror against some lower quality ones. It's time for the good, the bad, and the shit. So I'll limit this to talking about 2 examples of good because it would take several episodes to go in depth on every quality example out there, even considering the scarcity of gems in this subgenre in my experience. The ones that do stand out, they all have just so much working in their favor, so much going on both on screen and behind the scenes that I just couldn't do them justice in one segment together. If I decide to revisit this topic, we can discuss more about them then. But you know the most iconic ones already. A Cure for Wellness, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, American Horror Story Season 2, Asylum, Batman Arkham Asylum, Cult of Chucky, Dallas Buyers Club in some ways, Girl Interrupted, Grave Encounters, the original Halloween 2, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Outlast, Shutter Island, The Exorcist, and The Exorcist 3. That's about all the most iconic ones I know of. Just those that I listed, I could do a whole series of follow-up episodes on. We'll see, maybe a Hospital Horror Part 2 or 3 podcast just sometime in the future. For this episode, I'm going to focus on a couple examples that share something specific in common, which I think contributes to how they highlight the particular horror of hospitals and medicine in general. First, we'll start off with a based on true events limited series that was pretty big just a couple years ago. Dr. Death, a 2021 dramatic thriller telling the story of the infamous Christopher Dunch, played here by Joshua Jackson. This man, according to this show's portrayal and accounts from multiple people who worked or otherwise interacted with him, had clear signs of sociopathic and increasingly unstable behavior, yet he not only became a successful neurosurgeon, fooling many of his colleagues, superiors, and teachers into perceiving him as this blossoming revolutionary medical genius through a sheer systemic failure of the medical community and every level of business overseeing it. This guy was able to operate for 2 years on a total of 38 patients. If my math is right from what I double-checked before recording, he botched 35 of those 38 surgeries. 31 of his patients ended up paralyzed or seriously permanently injured as a direct result of his gross incompetence and just medieval surgical performance. He even turned his best friend into a quadriplegic, Jerry Summers, who later tragically died from complications related to his operation in February of 2021. Of these 35 patients operated on by Dunch, 2 of them apart from Mr. Summers died. The nurses who were in the operating room with him watched as he butchered these people one after another despite their repeated protests that he was not following procedure. He did virtually everything wrong. Even someone who's never attended a day of med school could see some of what he was doing and just recognize that he never should have been allowed to practice once, let alone this many times.
Erroneous! Erroneous!
Multiple co-workers and subordinates tried to report what he was doing. Nurses tried to warn their bosses. Other doctors complained. The people in charge of the hospital got complaints. Patients, complained several times. Seems that his colleagues and an assistant district attorney fought through the system to stop him. The series takes you through their investigation step by step of how they tracked his medical background to find all the critical flaws that allowed him to go this far, as well as flashbacks showing Christopher's life from his point of view starting from childhood. A documentary also released that same year, Dr. Death, The Undoctored Story. I've watched both. They cover most of the same ground with some obvious differences in format, but also information that makes them both worth watching if you want to leave feeling royally pissed off and just terrified of getting surgery ever again, more so than you probably already were. And we can't excuse this on grounds of, well, it happened a long time ago, the medical profession was still evolving, it was a different time. No, this happened in the 2010s. If you read his bio, Dunch completed his undergraduate degree in 1995, then finished his residency to become a neurosurgeon in 2010, after participating in less than 100 surgeries. From what I've read, if this is right, typical minimum participation for entering neurosurgery is over 1,000 operations. So break out the calculators for all of us who've long since lost our mental capacity to do math. This guy got to be a surgeon in a lucrative field after doing less than 1/10 of the required work. During his 4th year of training, he was moved to a program for impaired physicians, not being allowed to continue his residency until months later, and still, he was narcissistic enough to frequently boast about his abilities from his first day, even when he hadn't proven himself in a single area yet. Yeah, direct quote from one of his former colleagues, veteran vascular surgeon Randall Kirby. He couldn't wield a scalpel. Yeah, this guy was a suspected drug addict. His own friends saying they'd see him go into work and operate after a night of cocaine abuse. One of them even openly stated on record that they would never have trusted him as their surgeon. You know, his resume and educational record made him look overqualified on paper, a resume he was proven to have lied on, by the way. Yes, most everyone does, but I'd respectfully argue that maybe medicine is one area where you might want to be 100% upfront, generally, yeah. And most of these operations, from what the doctors and patients that were interviewed tell us, were very minor or, at worst, minimally invasive procedures that literally any averagely competent neurosurgeon could do. You know, a lot of these people just wanted to get mild issues with their backs fixed. They didn't come in with complex, life-threatening problems or diseases. And even with how hard all these people who knew Dunch tried to get the truth out, most of them weren't listened to. The nurses' concerns weren't taken seriously fast enough, partially because doctors' opinions generally held authority over theirs. It just comes with the territory in that environment. The people in charge of the hospital didn't respond quickly. This whole story gives us an in-depth look at just how flawed the system of medicine is, from the staff to corporate to the overall bureaucracy that interferes in medicine. It could very easily make you lose all faith in it just because it's so scary and just astonishing, almost impressive in a tragic way, how long it took and how many lives were taken or ruined before this dude finally got put away. He wasn't convicted until February of 2017.
Yeah,
Whoa!
relax.
Whoa!
Okay. I think that's a good start.
This motherfucker!
I can't even say that there's a silver lining in that he finally lost his license and was sentenced to life in prison. I personally don't see anything close to sufficient justice in that for the victims, because while they're left in God knows what quality of life, the ones who survived, Dunch, to paraphrase a line from the series, never has to suffer the way they did, and presumably still do, by going under his own knife. I don't know what kind of health he's currently in, but we can reasonably assume that at the very least, he still has the full use of his limbs and spine. You know, you can hear just how just talking about this gets me angry, because it's just incredible the number of mistakes and just negligence that built this leaning Jenga tower of clusterfucks. You know, some characters point out how there was nothing they could do realistically in the position they were in, just because of how the system works. And it goes without saying that it'll never be perfect. I don't know of anyone who's unironically asking for that. But this is leagues, entire oceans beyond imperfection. The more you look into it, just the less excusable it becomes, and the series ends on this chilling note of saying in the last scene of the last episode, what happened here will happen again. Specifically, the implication is unless the system changes and some major improvements are made. As far as how things may or may not have changed since this case happened, I really don't know. Okay, second example of some 5-star Gordon Ramsay approved gourmet hospital horror.
Finally, some good fucking food.
This is one of my favorite modern horror movies ever made, 2004's underrated Japanese film Kansen, which means infection or infected in English if you can't stand subtitles. By all means, take your chances with the hilarious English dub, because, that never ruins the experience. Despite the Asian horror craze of the 2000s, this one tragically never got a fair shake in America. Lionsgate Films Home Entertainment took it direct to video here in the States on May 17th, 2005. It was marketed in the US as Infection. I don't know if infection and infected are interchangeable. I'm hoping this podcast raises enough money for me to take a class so I can one day fulfill my dream of that nerdy but well-meaning American who travels to Tokyo, speaks offensively terrible Japanese to everyone out of a bilingual dictionary, meets a beautiful J-pop singer who whisks me away on a sightseeing tour of her culture and falls in love with me despite us being from two different worlds, literally, because then she transforms Magical Girl style into an over-the-top JRPG character, and we both end up singing karaoke in a Miyazaki art style isekai anime. Is that too much to ask for in this fucked up world?
Hey, yo!
Sorry, I lost the plot for a second there. That's my shit, not yours. Kansen, this lower-budget powerhouse of a mind-bending horror thriller, was adapted from an earlier screenplay done by Masayuki Ochiai.
Flawless pronunciation.
For the 2000 anthology horror series Tales of the Unusual. If you're interested in that, it was basically Japan's equivalent to the Twilight Zone movie. Ochiai directed and wrote the screenplay for Kansen as well. It was his baby. It released on October 2nd, 2004 in Japan as part of another anthology, the 6-part J-horror theater series, boasting a cast of then-popular Japanese film and TV actors. It was the second highest-grossing film that first weekend at the box office, just behind I, Robot.
Oh, that's hot.
Yeah, I hate to leave you hanging after all that build-up, but I can't really say much about this film's plot. I know, I'm sorry, I would really be doing you a disservice if I gave away anything more than the bare minimum. Generally, the best experience for any film is to go in blind, but trust me, the less you know about this one, the harder it will most likely hit. As far as what I can say, I'll try to balance telling you just enough of the premise while keeping details vague. Okay, so Kansen takes place in a rundown hospital where supplies, staff, funding, and available rooms for patients are all running out faster than green herbs in the early hours of a first-time Resident Evil playthrough. With the facility on its last legs, the small group of remaining staff are physically and mentally exhausted, sleep-deprived, and their jobs in question as they haven't heard from the hospital director in days. It's just this perfect storm for a losing battle all around that looks like something right out of what countless hospitals are still going through as a result of the pandemic. If this movie had come out in 2020 or even today, I'm confident that it would have gotten significantly more attention and marketing exposure. The few remaining nurses and doctors on duty have no time to rest, however, when a mistake involving a patient leads to dire consequences for everybody. As the characters face the guilt of their actions one by one, what started as a messy, busy night shift transforms into a nightmare. I've read and listened to multiple reviews of this movie from the minority of people that have watched it. It has developed a cult following. The general consensus, which I agree with overall, is that this is not an easy film to understand the first time you watch it. The twist finale is especially convoluted. There's a lot of things you will most likely not get on your first watch. I've seen it a few times now. I own it on DVD. And some details in it still confuse me a little. Not to sound racist by any means. But this movie very much illustrates some fundamental differences between how Japanese films are often structured, written, paced, and how they convey a story in comparison to many American and European films. Beyond the language barrier and cultural divides, the way Ochiai directed and wrote this probably would not fly with how the majority of Hollywood studios prefer their movies to be made. They'd most likely look down on this as too art house or too confusing and want to exposit and spoon feed everything to the audience more because, us Americans, we're idiots.
You want to get sued?
I remember rumors of a Kansen remake circulating on the internet for a while after the trend of Asian horror remakes throughout the 2000s that was kicked off by The Ring and later exploded thanks to The Grudge. Japanese horror remakes in particular were getting churned out almost every year or every other year, sometimes as soon as a couple years after the original released. People complain nowadays about how fast Disney is remaking everything, like how they're remaking Moana way too soon. That was normal in Asian horror remakes for about a decade. It didn't slow down, I think, until the early 2010s. But point being, from my assessment and everything I've learned so far about cultural differences between different countries' film industries and filmmaking styles, an American remake of Kansen fundamentally would not work. So much of it would be lost in translation and ultimately come off like a reimagining at best, and a pretty much completely different film at worst outside sharing the same title.
Like that World War Z movie!
Yeah, the story, characters, and setting absolutely could not be done in the US without making many drastic changes that would render it probably near unrecognizable from its source material. It's the same reason I hope they never remake Train to Busan. It just can't be done justice faithfully if you take it outside the context of where the plot is set. America's just too different from South Korea or Japan, and etc. The best we'd be able to do is recreate it on the most superficial levels. Now, what I wouldn't mind, provided it was well executed, of course, is if a quality filmmaker in Japan wanted to remake or retell Kansen's story in modern day, with the setting being changed to a backdrop of post-pandemic Japan. Again, there's so much of this film that eerily, almost prophetically reflects how COVID-19 impacted hospitals and the medical industry altogether, that I would support using that as a theme or supporting theme. I wouldn't want that to be the focus of a modern retelling, but showing a Japanese hospital struggling like this in current year and characters still discussing or referencing how the pandemic is still affecting them, that I think would instantly make a modern Kansen more relatable and easier to get interested in for a hospital-based horror movie. So again, I can't say much more about the story or characters. The film just does so much with each of them, along with lighting, sound design, cinematography, and particularly the use of color, to take what initially looks like a modest little overwhelmed hospital and gradually make it feel like the staff are imprisoned in this place, in their jobs and their lives, and in a haunting, oppressive atmosphere steadily builds to make the hospital itself seem almost alive, like this dying animal that's as overworked and neglected as the people in it. It feels like this labyrinthian beast slowly rotting from the inside and threatening to take the faculty down with it.
Take a breath. You smell that? That's death.
What sets this apart from Dr. Death, though, is how the movie deals not only with the infrastructural and personal effects of the system failing everyone, patients and staff alike. It heavily explores from beginning to end the psychological effects of guilt, insecurity, and just the fragility of these doctors and nurses, which manifests in various forms. It really sells how, despite their best efforts, they're as human as we are, and the guilt from the choices they make just becomes like this monster eating away at them. Yeah, you really do feel for some of them, even if you aren't meant to like all of them. A couple characters do reveal their true nature and what pieces of human garbage they are. Some of them never should have taken this career path, which is also reflected in their relationships with the patients. No love for their patients, but they all have a mirror held up to them that ultimately makes them see themselves for who and what they truly are. I think that's about all I can give away. Just trust me, if you enjoy a thinking person's type of kind of symbolic horror, and if you pay attention and can tolerate the subtitles, Kansen is 110% worth the watch. It's honestly one of the psychologically scariest stories I've ever seen, and that is a high bar for me. So now we come to my pick for the Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. As discussed in the childhood trauma episode, I was a Halloween fan for many years. I grew up with it, didn't always like what the movies did, but I watched it anyway. Generally found them entertaining, at least. Up until the Rob Zombie duology. I still haven't seen the newest trilogy that began with Halloween 2018, and have honestly little to no interest in it. Rob's 2007 remake factors into my thoughts on the 2009 sequel too, since they both spend a significant amount of their runtime in a hospital. I guess you could call this a two-parter, critiquing the hospital horror in both movies, but primarily the 09 sequel. So I have not personally met or listened to many Halloween fans, even diehard Rob Zombie fans who enjoyed his Halloween 2. A minority exist, I'm sure, just never in my general vicinity to my knowledge, and I've met a lot of Halloween lovers, including devout fans of Season of the Witch. Honestly, though, I would rather sit through Halloween 3 10 times in a row, or the 2007 remake 20 times, than ever watch this sequel again. No exaggeration. Like, I seriously, to this day, do not like much of anything about this movie, and I don't know that many people who do. Rob, if my research is correct, didn't even want to make this until after the studios lured him back with enough money and promised him total creative control, which was then, of course, conflicted by numerous studio suggestions that he make it a faithful recreation of John Carpenter's Halloween 2, a film Carpenter famously never wanted to make, and it seems almost like fate that Rob's commented since 09 about how he dislikes so much of this movie that he made. I guess he just couldn't escape the sequel curse that's pretty much plagued this franchise, with a lot more misses than hits from the beginning, in my view. And so many fans praised 2007's Halloween for Rob boldly taking it in a new direction. And, he tried a lot of new things with it, some of which have benefited its otherwise divisive legacy. He gave Michael a more grounded, believable, less supernatural backstory as this young child from a, stereotypically broken home, but a very believable one at that, who just snaps one night in what looked like a crime of passion, where he just couldn't take the circumstances he was living in anymore. He's given more of an explanation for, going cuckoo this time, as opposed to the original, where Carpenter deliberately didn't specify any cause or motive beyond plain, unknowable evil. The new Mikey descends into madness over his 15 years spent in a loony bin eating hospital food that inexplicably helped him grow into a WWE wrestler. He then breaks out, kills a couple people, gets triggered by premarital coitus, yada, yada, yada. You all know the story. But a big part of what made the 2007 film, and before it, Carpenter's Halloween 2, was the setting. We only very briefly saw the institution Michael was held at in the 1978 original before he escapes in the first few minutes. The 1981 sequel spent a lot more time and effort immersing us in this atmosphere of being trapped in a hospital with a seemingly near-invincible killer stalking you through the corridors, rooms, and stairways, and so on. It's a very similar claustrophobia to what Kansen achieved in its lighting, set design, sound, and cinematography. And it was in many ways a much scarier setting because you no longer had the sense of wholesomeness, familiarity, and safety associated with the idyllic suburb being suddenly tainted by a night of terror and murder. You know, this time the monster was chasing Laurie Strode in a place that, as I've said, already evokes a strong fear of mortality and general lack of control. Well, Rob brought that back by giving us a more intimate look into Michael's mental deterioration in the remake, as his cell became the only place he was generally calm and content, until, of course, those two rapist rednecks had to bust in and break that last straw on the giant's back by assaulting that poor female patient in my opinion, this unnecessary and borderline fetishizing rape scene. I've listened to Rob comment on the purpose of that whole sequence, but the way he approached it and how long it goes on for struck me as overindulgent at a certain point. But I suppose one could argue that contributed to reflecting the darkness of Michael's environment forcing its way in and just breaking his psyche past the point of no return, reducing him to a wild beast on a rampage. And by extension, we could say that Laurie symbolized the last bit of his humanity and his soul, which he ironically destroys after coming back to find her and just traumatizing her to the point of the girl she was essentially dying alongside Michael when she shoots him at the end of the 2007 film. Then, of course, Rob's Halloween 2 happened. It floored the gas, put a blind, deaf, dumb lemming behind the wheel, and pretty much Thelma and Louised that shit right off a cliff. So yeah, remember that hospital and all the atmosphere it added that would have perfectly complemented Scout Taylor Compton's Laurie as the sequel opens with her bloody, battered self rolling in freshly crazed from the worst night of her life so far? Remember the nail-biting cat and mouse dynamic of Jamie Lee Curtis searching for a way out as Michael gruesomely tore his way through the unsuspecting hospital staff one by one? Well, the trailers for Rob's sequel certainly set us up to expect that, and he did deliver on it. For about 25 minutes.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Yeah, apparently some friggin' mastermind, might have been zombie, might not, decided they had a better idea, because they literally bring everything to do with the hospital to a grinding halt after almost 25 out of 1 hour and 45 minutes. That's 105 minutes total, counting the end credits in the theatrical version. The alternate ending stretches it to 108. But let's be fair and go with the theatrical runtime. Get out those calculators again for a little division. We'll just round up to 25. So how many times does that go into 105? 4.2. So basically, even accounting for how we rounded up a few minutes, that's the first quarter of the movie. If we divide it into segments, those being A, the hospital sequence, B, Michael's return to Haddonfield coinciding with Laurie's PTSD struggles and the new asshole Loomis exploiting the previous massacre for his book deal, C, Michael's second round of murders following the revelation to Laurie that he's her brother, and D, the final standoff with the police that ends with Michael and Loomis's deaths, and also Laurie's in the alternate ending. The hospital takes up almost the entire first act. You want to feel even more like this movie wasted a quarter of your watch time? When Laurie escapes the hospital at last, only for Michael to trap her in the parking lot with the final curtain seemingly about to fall, well, which we know it wouldn't anyway because there's still the rest of the movie to go, and you'd have to be a scientifically fascinating kind of stupid to, kill Laurie fucking Strode off that early.
I'll see you in hell.
Guess what? The whole thing is revealed to have been a nightmare. None of it happened except for maybe the first 5 minutes where Laurie's admitted, and we get a detailed look at how brutalized she was by the end of the last film before the staff treat her. None of it affects hardly anything for the rest of the plot.
It's enough to get me to the boiling point.
Yeah, there's no evidence that it was some premonition of Michael coming back or telepathic link between him and Laurie, like with Jamie Lloyd in Halloween, I guess, 4 through 5. But yeah, that would have been repetitive anyway, since we already knew Michael was coming back at some point, no matter what. I mean, literally not 1 second of those almost 25 minutes mattered at all in the grand scheme of the story. I can only venture a guess that its purpose was to, one, give fan service to the original sequel, since fans expected Rob to follow the basic premise of that film, hence the hospital setting, and secondly, to establish Laurie's PTSD. But regardless, that is, in my opinion, one of the absolute biggest middle fingers you could have given to not only Halloween fans, including fans of the 2007 film. It's a finger to general audiences whose expectations were built up by the movie and its marketing. The friggin' trailers, again, led us to believe the hospital would play more of a role than it did. We all knew after the last film that Rob was intentionally taking Halloween in his own direction. Again, the remake showed that, but he and at least some of the people working with him on this one, they had to know this would come off to a significant number of fans as manipulative or potentially false advertising. There is not a ghost of a chance in all 9 circles of hell that he didn't know this could majorly backfire. And the film's critical reception proves that. One of the most common criticisms I hear and share myself on the 2009 movie is that it utterly wasted the potential that Rob had to take what Carpenter did in 1981 and give new life to the scenario of Michael stalking an injured, vulnerable Laurie in a hospital for 90 minutes. The film makes such a strong first impression with her admittance, treatment, setting her up in her room, and then having to run and hide as the staff are dropping dead around her. The stage was set for a return to that cat and mouse suspense that made the original sequel so compelling. The one kill with that nurse played by the always lovely Octavia Spencer, or the one Laurie runs into while looking for help. She turns around to reveal her throat slit and she screams, but she can't talk, and never missing a cue, Michael then appears to finish her as Laurie watches helplessly. That to me was the scariest, or at least most memorable death in Rob's sequel, aside from Annie, of course. Or that was a tearjerker, especially with Brad Dourif's reaction as her dad, Sheriff Brackett. That was a tearjerker for a lot of fans in general, I imagine, seeing Danielle Harris finally killed on screen in a Halloween movie. After she came back into the franchise so many years after she was a kid, and was nearly killed in the 2007 remake. And of course her character had been killed off years ago in the original canon with Halloween 6, where she was played by Justine Chelsea Brandy.
These timelines are so confusing.
But the difference is Annie's death here actually happened. Everything that happened in the original Carpenter sequel at least attempted to build on what had happened prior in meaningful ways. Rob's version is like putting a modern coat of paint on a chunk of all of that, setting up this appetizer for a delicious meal, then throwing the main course out and replacing it with 3 courses of crap.
Crap, mega crap.
This nurse and everything to do with the hospital just felt like a complete waste overall. It was so rushed that the atmosphere and pacing just don't get enough time to really breathe, so it comes off to me like everything after Laurie's taken there and taken care of is just going through the motions. Even when the action ramps up, it feels just very by the numbers. Even on first watch, I noticed this, and after the first few minutes, I was already starting to think to myself,
I don't like where this is going.
I rarely ever say this because it so rarely ever proves to be the case, But I actually think the studios were right on this one. If Rob was going to make this sequel, then I think he should have taken more from what Carpenter did this time. Yeah, it's just... This was just such a creative misfire all around, a conceptual equivalent to shooting yourself in the foot. It struck many fans as a slap in the face, and even if it wasn't Rob's idea, he still had creative control this time. He could have said no if this was the best they could come up with, or, you know, going with this silly idea of, you know, people who have artistic integrity. He could have just walked away, just not done it, you know. I really don't think he was in a position where he needed the money that badly. I mean, I'm sorry, but just, you know, sometimes you just are better off walking away. You know, he may have tried to make the best of a movie he didn't really want to do, and again, it really shows, but even Carpenter, when he was in a similar situation, you know, he and his wife at the time managed to make a smarter, more effective film than this. You know, I'm really trying to be fair here. I try my best generally to see the potential in most everything, but 2009's Halloween 2 might have been better off, I think, just not being made. You know, it doesn't even feel like it fits tonally with the 2007 film, because again, that film made a point of Michael being more grounded and having nothing to do with supernatural elements, you know, cult, psychic powers, or any of that shit. That was the defining difference between his vision and Carpenter's, and John advised him to make this his own. Instead, this sequel, for everything that it tries to stand on its own, ends up regurgitating so much of the older films to a generally inferior result instead, and it tries to have its cake and eat it too. You know, using this half-assed subplot about hereditary mental illness, white horse syndrome or something, so Laurie could essentially develop or inherit the same sickness as Michael. It's just using psychosis as a new, more scientific label for what amounts to the same ideas in a different wrapper. It's literally a bastardized version of almost the exact same passing the torch of evil dynamic that was set up with little Jamie at the end of Halloween 4. Or, you know, they even tried it again to a similarly inferior result in the newest trilogy with Halloween Ends. And you know, 4 handled that idea so much better, at least up until it was immediately abandoned in the next sequel. They retconned it, so, you know, little Jamie didn't even kill her stepmother, she just attacked her. Yeah, retcons are a regular thing with this franchise, if you didn't know. And it's like, Rob could have just remade Halloween 2, or just skipped it altogether if he felt there was a better way, and done his own version of ideas from 4 through 5. But none of those stories work as well when you mash all 3 of them together, you know, sans the cult stuff, thank God, with some standard Rob Zombie zaniness, and into this sad, conflicting mess that ends on a note of feeling like it didn't know what it wanted to be. And you know, that sucks, because there is some genuinely great acting in this movie from, you know, again, Brad Dourif, Scout Taylor Compton, and Danielle Harris, yes, Malcolm McDowell. Just so much wasted, and that whole hospital sequence makes it hurt that much more, when I can see how much better it could have been, and everything that followed just systematically, fundamentally undermines it. Okay, now I'll attempt to be more constructive here, a little less negative. Let's brainstorm a little of what I would have at least tried to do from the beginning here, and were I in Rob's position. Maybe it would have helped to save all the stuff from the 2007 film showing Michael's years in the mental institution, just skipped past all of that from the moment he's taken away from his family home in the police car with that first close-up holding on him, turning his head with that little psycho look, cut straight to the aftermath with a time skip of his mom falling into depression and sadly, you know, deleting herself, with a baby Laurie left in the house crying. And then when we get to the sequel, that's when we could have started off with seeing young Michael's introduction to, the younger Loomis, their therapy sessions, Michael's mental state getting worse until he kills that nurse that insulted him about his sister. That's when we'd get the big moment of Michael's mom seeing, along with Loomis, that her son is officially lost. He's too far gone beyond reason. His sickness or inner darkness or whatever has permanently corrupted him into this murderer that now only looks like her child. It's a powerful scene, very similar to the trope in similar movies where a character's loved one turns into a zombie or gets possessed by a demon or whatever, that they may still look or sound like them, but it's not them anymore. I would have cut that whole sequence from Michael's childhood therapy and the remake up until the 15-year time skip to where Loomis tells adult Michael he's retiring, and then he breaks out. The story from that point on would stay, I guess, mostly identical in the 2007 film, for what Rob did with that. For this sequel, I would have put more thematic emphasis on Laurie being stalked by Michael in the present-day hospital, and periodically cut to flashbacks of Michael's years in the mental ward and then back again to the present. And as young Michael grows, we'd see his perception of reality gradually deteriorate into those surreal dream visions from the 2009 film with all the creatures and his dead mom being there. We'd see his point of view as he isolates himself to working on all those masks he made in his cell. And you'd notice that as those masks get more recent and advanced in design, they'd start to resemble the creatures in his dreams, yet that would have given more meaning and context to why they look the way they do, and why he kept making so many of them. Him just is trying to bring those creatures to life in mask after mask, and trying to make them better and better, instead of them all just being random designs that he just was churning out on a conveyor belt. And this would continue, of course, until the night Michael broke out, because the rednecks who intruded into his cell disrupted his sanctuary. It would feel like that familiar chaos or cruel reality trying to shatter his fantasy, with him remembering that his mom is now dead, and he's just so consumed with anger at this screwed up world that, contributed to him becoming what he was, this world that just ruined his life and his family, and he just snaps and decides that he's going to destroy it now. Just kill. Young Michael in the crumbling fantasy just roars, and that's when the evil finally takes over. I would integrate this into the 2009 sequel, treating it like two parallel stories gradually coming together, until the finale, when Laurie has nowhere left to run or hide. She's forced to confront Michael, maybe on the hospital roof during a thunderstorm, just letting the weather symbolize how Michael's rage is stronger than ever. It's booming and will never stop as long as he's still breathing. And, she might try to reason with him, saying something like, "Big brother, please." And he'd stop for a moment, staring at his crying sister with that signature head tilt of his. She's just desperate at this point. But after a few seconds, he continues approaching with a scalpel in hand like in the original sequel. He's just an unrelenting borderline Terminator at this point. His mask coming apart but still hanging on his face. You never show his face. Even in the original film, we only barely see it for a split second. As he puts his mask back on, it wasn't that well lit. His adult face is just better when it stays hidden, in my opinion. It's always better to just leave it to the imagination, picturing what face this little boy grew into. We could still have the police standoff, except it's at the hospital this time. The cops surround the building with Brackett, it showing up after he finds what's left of Annie, and then later Loomis arrives. A sniper could get a few, maybe a couple to a few shots in Michael, but he just keeps getting back up. His walk may be degrading to a slight limp from the damage, but they just can't get a headshot. They don't have a police chopper or the time to get one. And because, they see Laurie on the roof, and they're all in disbelief, like, mother of God, what is he? Maybe the devil or the boogeyman really did come to Haddonfield. This would all feed into Michael's legend there for many years to come. And Scout Taylor's Lori is resigned to die now, thinking she has nothing left to lose. She doesn't see a way out. This monster's already taken just about everything from her. There's nothing of his inner child left to save. It seems Michael is gone. Only the shape remains. And we see in her mind what her plan is as he gets closer to her. She pictures grabbing him and taking them both over the roof's edge, just splatting on the parking lot with the cops surrounding them, their bodies positioned, with Lori still holding on to him. It would almost look like a bloody hug, like the siblings are tragically reunited in death. And as Michael raises the scalpel, he can't read her mind or anything like that. Lori could whisper something like what Jamie Lee Curtis says in the newest film, Halloween Ends. Scout would mutter to herself,
Come and get me, motherfucker.
And you could potentially still do something with this new take on the idea of her and Michael being, I guess, connected mentally in some way. But again, I would not try to copy what Halloween 4 and 5 did. No psychic link or any of that. I guess maybe you could portray it more like a shared psychosis. Just make the execution of it more clinical, less blatantly supernatural. But Loomis would get past the police line, as he does in the 2009 film As Is, and reach the roof in the nick of time to get Michael's attention and tell Lori to run. And, she barely gets away. Michael's too injured to chase her fast enough, so he just keeps limping, just refusing to quit. The cops still don't have a clear headshot, and like Donald Pleasance, Malcolm sacrifices himself at the end, taking the ultimate responsibility for this monster he originally failed to stop and the child that he failed to help. This would be an homage to how he does it in Carpenter's Halloween 2, just have Lori be the sole survivor after Loomis kills himself and Michael together in an explosion. Maybe he steals a grenade from a police car, or I don't know, some kind of flammable chemical from the hospital. The grenade would maybe make more sense. The cops just bring in everything they have, thinking, they're going to need an army to take Michael down. They already know, or have heard at this point, how many times he shrugged off gunshots. I definitely would have done so much different with this version of Loomis. I flat out disagree fundamentally with most of how Rob changed him, especially in the sequel. The new Loomis, as he refers to himself, with what sounds like this ego that he never showed before. That's not Samuel Loomis. He was always written to be the antithesis of Michael, the Van Helsing to his Dracula, the good, kind, humble man, and at his core. No shade to Malcolm McDowell. He's a great actor, but his portrayal as it was written is such an insult to Donald Pleasance's legacy that he brought to the role. But he could still have his redemption at the end, maybe telling Michael, I won't leave you again, let's finish this together, I'll see you in hell. It's time, Michael. And, Michael takes him down, stabbing into him, or crushing his skull or something right as he sets off the grenade, and boom. They're both engulfed in fire, with the storm clearing as the rain puts the flames out. Leaving their charred bodies and the blackened remaining scraps of the mask. Lori's taken away, but she's so badly further traumatized after all of this and losing her best friend Annie that she ends up institutionalized at the end like Michael. The Sheriff Brackett would visit her every now and then, and because she's basically the closest thing to family he has left, closest thing to a daughter.
You don't turn your back on family.
But she just doesn't respond to anyone, and she's catatonic. That would make the Lori Goes Insane ending so much stronger, in my view. It could have been almost identical to what the film did with her hallucinating at the end of the 2009 movie, except she wouldn't see that silly white horse. None of that would play into this. I personally thought that was kind of dumb, even if it is a real mental condition. What she'd see is a vision of young Michael standing in front of her as she sits on her bed in that cell with the song Love Hurts playing. And he looks like he did on Halloween night when before he killed his stepdad and older sister with the blood on him. You know, he takes the little clown mask off and they have a stare down, and he smiles at her, but in a sweet way, the way he smiled at her as a baby to comfort her when she was crying from all the chaos and in their home. You know, it would be a very early, maybe repressed memory from when Laurie's older brother was loving and still had some good left in him, even though he was already so messed up in his own life at that point. And that's one way I think Rob Zombie actually made the sibling angle work to his advantage in a way Carpenter never did, because, you know, he never liked that idea. They were not related in the original, and they maintained that for the newest trilogy, which I appreciated. But Zombie used that to give his take on the story a more emotional hook, and it could have been a bittersweet note to end the 2009 sequel on, where Laurie's been hurt by the monster that her brother turned into, but here at the very end, it's like his spirit or her mind's manifestation of it finally returns to comfort her. The movie used the tagline "Family is Forever," if we remember from the 2009 film's posters. This ending could add more meaning to that, more emotional punch, and symbolism for good versus evil. If you want implication of some kind, I guess it could be interpreted that adult Michael sensed this small imprint of his humanity left inside Laurie, or maybe projected it onto her, even if she wasn't consciously aware of it, because she didn't remember her life with Michael's family. Her original family. She was adopted by the Strodes, but you could perceive this as another reason why the evil in Michael escaped to pursue her, apart from their family ties, because the evil was drawn to that little bit of good Michael left and determined that by killing the person he loved most as a boy, the child Michael would finally be truly dead. And that's the other factor in why he was so magnetically drawn to Laurie. So there would be no dialogue in this scene. Neither of them would have anything left to say. Their body language would say everything. Little Mikey's smile after he removes and drops the clown mask tells her, "I'm sorry, I wish things had been different. I love you forever. I hope you remember this part of me as I was as a human being." And Laurie smiling back would carry a different, not sinister impact, and instead her smile would convey that even though she'll never fully recover from how the evil Michael destroyed her life, this small piece of his soul, his heart, still survives within hers and was part of her all along, and that brings the smile out of her to where she's not catatonic anymore. So maybe there's a chance that she can at least start to heal, come back to life again. And if you want one last kick in the feels, maybe the vision of little Mikey could walk up to hug her, or just wrap his little arms around her. He sheds a happy tear down his cheek, I guess, and the ending fades out with her hugging him back, and roll credits.
I'd like to thank the Academy.
No, but that could have been a more fitting end to Rob's Halloween franchise, I think, if there had to be a sequel. And the best part, it would totally fit with the song Love Hurts playing for Laurie in that cell, like it did for young Michael in the 2007 film, only that this new ending would parallel how it was used back then, in the double meaning it carries for these two characters. That, the song has both a negative and a positive context now, two sides of one coin, much like their two hospital experiences, and these two movies as a whole. They would have complemented each other more this way, as really a two-part story of this broken family, torn apart by darkness within and without, but finally brought back together, just not how they expected. So the evil didn't quite take everything away from them in the end. It's like a tragic family love story, but the love survives. And that is going to do it for today's episode of Horror Convos. What did you think of the topic and examples this episode? Do you agree or disagree with my takes? Any hospital horror examples I didn't name that you'd recommend? Don't be shy in those comments either way. Remember, this is more than a podcast. It is a discussion between fans. New episodes release every other Monday. You cannot rush content this sweet. Matt Damon is fucking those like and subscribe buttons, and so should you.
Not literally.
Again, Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. We appreciate every review you post and every cent you donate to support us on Patreon. And join me next time for the first episode of what will become a recurring topic on this podcast, horror classics that deserve a remake. Which classic will it be? Tune in to find out. Until we talk again, good night and be well.